like brick. So we have brick here, and this is the free brick section. So I would suggest you use this guy right here. I'm actually going to use version 3 of this, which is in the premium section. It's just a slightly later version of it, which looks slightly more realistic, but you will be totally fine just using this free version right here. Now, in terms of, oh, and look, it's just stalled the site, so it's not actually loading the, there we go. Now, in terms of the maps that we need, we don't need the diffuse in this case. In fact, we don't need most of these. You could use like ambient occlusion if you wanted to for like a little bit of thing there, or like displacement if you were doing like getting the camera really close to the brick, you would use something like that. But in our case, the one map that we're going to use is the normal map, and that's all we're going to use. So it's like faking bump. It's exactly like what we did for the condensation. So that's the only one of these that we're going to use, the normal map. And then for the size of it, you could probably actually get away with 1K because it's like in the background and it's going to be out of focus. So you can just download that. So once you've downloaded and unzipped that, what you're going to do is bring up your little window here, find your folder, which you've unzipped, and then you're going to take that normal map and drag it across into the shader window, node setup. Gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? The node view? There's a word for it. Shader editor is what it's technically called, but who calls it that? Anyway, all right, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag that not into the base color because we're not driving the color at all. We're just going to drive the bump, so into the normal input down there. All right, now when you do that, it'll become completely black, and that is because it's missing in between there a vector normal map node. So this is going to convert that from a colored image into something that Blender can actually read. You can see it starts to look a little bit like a bump now. But as well as that, we also need to change the color space. This is going to convert that from, all right, now when you do that, it'll become completely black, and that is because it's missing in between there a vector normal map node. So this is going to convert that from a colored image into something that Blender can actually read. You can see it starts to look a little bit like a bump now. But as well as that, we also need to change the color space to non-color data. And because of that bug, it won't refresh it. So let me just do that. And there we go. So now it's actually treating this like a proper bump. And it's all working fine, except it's rotated the wrong way. So I'm going to rotate it along what axes? X-axis by 90 degrees. Your axes could be different depending on which way the camera is facing. And I'm just going to go underneath it. And, well, first of all, actually, let's move this light. Move it to this. Oh, I think I moved it the wrong way. Move it to the side a little bit just so that I can see from the point of view down here. I want this to look like paint, right? So I'm going to use a roughness value that's a little bit sharper than what it was by default. So around about a 0.3 will look a little bit like sharper than what it was by default. So around about a 0.3 will look a little bit like paint. Not wet paint, obviously, but something that's, yeah, just a little bit not as dull as rubber or whatever. So cool. Now here's the cool thing. So because we've driven this and we're making it apply to the bump map, the base color is totally open here. And that's the color of it, like this paint here, even though the material that we downloaded was white, right? It was painted white. Because we're only using the bump map, this is wide open. So I could make this look like anything. So it's a cool thing. Like you don't actually realize, but like when you go to find a material, if you're only using the bump map of something, you can make that color look like anything you want. So it looks like a pink purple brick texture, right? Pink brick wall for the back of our cafe there, just like that. Pretty cool. For the back of purple brick texture, right? Pink brick wall for the back of our cafe there, just like that. Pretty cool. And that's basically that. The only other thing I'm going to change is with my light here. We're just going to do a very this is the most basic light setup that you'll probably ever do, but it's the simplest, and sometimes the simplest is what works the nicest. One single light just to the side, and I'm trying to think of like a cafe, right? So that's what I'm trying to emulate here. That's what this brick wall is doing in the background. That's what the countertop is, the coffee cup, everything. I'm going for this scene of a cafe. So in a cafe, there's a window, right? And you've got natural light coming in through that window. So that's what this is here. Now the size of this, you can see as I increase or decrease that, this size here changes. In fact, let's go to layout mode. That would probably help. So it's a little bit bigger to see. Let's go in here. Yeah, so as I increase the size of this, you can see that it looks softer. It looks like over. You would think bigger would be better. Sometimes it is. But it overcast lighting. And that's why overcast lighting looks it looks flat and uniform. It's because like the whole sky becomes its big giant light source, like a big diffuse light box. Because this size here is as if that is a big glowing ball in your scene right now. That's the size of it, right? So soft lighting tends to actually look really good for food, depending on the type of food. But for this type of food, soft lighting will look good. However, it's so soft right now that it's lost direction. It's like you're losing shadow in there, which is helping you to understand form. So actually you want to find a value kind of like soft, but it's got a little bit of edge to it. So I'm going to go with like a 0.8 value, right? In fact, in the lighting series, which I recommend you watch if you want to understand lighting more, I made that series because honestly, I think lighting is so important, and there was really no tutorials that I could find that was teaching lighting theory very well. So I made that whole series. It's on YouTube. I'll put a link up there, wherever that little eye is, and you can click that and watch it. Maybe watch it after this series so that you've actually, mentally signed off on something before you move on. But it's definitely a good one if you want to take the next step. Cool. So that's it. That's the lighting. That's the brick. That's the countertop. And the only other thing, by the way, I would check is just check that the bricks that are in your this brick wall here, like the texture is important, like the scaling of things. And as it turns out, the size of these bricks is about the size of a coffee cup. So like the brick height. So actually, I've just realized this brick here should be about double the size. So I'm going to hit S and then type in the number 2. So S and then 2. That'll just scale it twice, and now it's roughly the right size. So now when I move that back, so S should be about double the size. So I'm going to hit S and then type in the number 2. So S and then 2. That'll just scale it twice, and now it's roughly the right size. So now when I move that back to about there, and this is like really subtle, right? It's pretty subtle, but it's just going to help the scene feel a little bit more grounded, a little more real, because the texture is actually going to match it in relation to the light and the shadows. It'll all just start to feel like an actual real scene. So just something minor, but can be important. All right, so just should be. So like the brick height. So actually, I've just realized this brick here should be about double the size. So I'm going to hit S and then type in the number 2. So S and then 2. That'll just scale it twice, and now it's roughly the right size. So now when I move that back to about there, and this is like really subtle, right? It's it a little more real, because the texture is actually going to match it in relation to the light and the shadows. It'll all just start to feel like an actual real scene. So just something minor, but can be important. All right, so in the next part, we're going to be adding in some final touches to add in all the correct settings and make this final image look polished before we move on to the animation. So click there, and I will see you in the next part. To what will almost certainly be an outlier in its welcome to what will almost certainly be an outlier in its boredom. Maybe this video we're just going to be doing final touches to the visual look of everything, because basically when you're making something, and this is actually a good point that you should take away from this, when you're building a scene, you don't want to try to like finish everything completely perfectly before moving on to the next thing. The best way to work is to like splatter, like block in the big shapes, then come back and do the materials, then do the lighting, and then come back and do the textures, and then do something else, and then come back and do the simulation. Like, you should do it like that. So basically, once you've got everything in the scene where you want it and how you want it, you'll start noticing a couple of things, like, oh, the donut material doesn't look quite right. The sprinkle, the icing, or the sprinkles are a little bit too big, or I want a different color scheme, etc. So there's all these little things that along the way that could be improved. And I want to help you guys make a good image, not just learn Blender, which I hope you have been learning Blender, but to make a good image. So point is there's a couple of things we want to change. For starters, this was just one that I just forgot. In the liquid tutorial, as short and pointless as that tutorial was, it was like adding one node. I forgot to include the one other thing, which people immediately pointed out in the comments, and that's the index of refraction, or IOR. If you don't know what refraction is, it's like if you stick a straw in a glass of water and like the straw looks like it's going sideways, that's refraction. It's like light is being like twisted and whatever. This will define that amount. So 1.45 is the amount for glass, but for liquid, including water, it's 1.33. But actually even boiled water is an even lower amount. It's 1.31. Now watch what happens when I change this. Did you notice it? No harm if you didn't, because it's very, very slight. It's like, in fact, it just looks as though like this gradient is a little bit more exaggerated, or like, I don't know, there's something very slight has changed about it, but you know, it's not a big deal. If you didn't notice, or even if you just leave it at 1.45, no one's gonna know or care. Anyway, another one, this was actually something that somebody pointed out in the comments, a couple of people. And I'm like, yeah, why didn't I do that? For the condensation around the ring here, it would be good if it was like foggy, because, you know, condensation tends to steam things up a little bit, right? So why not, as well as droplets, also have a little bit of fogginess, which you can do very simply with a roughness slider. If you just increase that to like 0.2 or more, you'll see that this now looks like frosted glass on just that section, just the, assuming, of course, you're doing it on the condensation part, it'll look a little bit like frosted glass. And that's just, it's a little something, something. A little something, something. Doesn't add a lot, and especially when we put it in the background with depth of field, you're probably not going to notice much, but it's a little slight thing that, that can help. Something else you might have noticed, this cup is like balancing on like a spinning top, right? It needs a little bit more of a solid base. When we were modeling off of the photo, it might have looked plausible, but from this angle, it definitely looks wrong. So we don't want it to topple over. So what I'm gonna do, in wireframe mode, I want to flatten it out. But actually, if we were to model this, like change this now, the liquid, you'll remember, was based off this model, like the inside part of it. So we would have to do that separately. But if we were to select the liquid and then the cup together, holding down Shift and then Tab, you can now edit both objects at the same time, which is a new feature of 2.8. You didn't used to be able to edit two objects at the same time, but now you can. Let me turn on screencast tool. There we go, so you can see what I'm pressing. Anyway, so what I'm gonna do is with vertex select mode, which you can get to by hitting 1, 2, or 3. You can switch between those at the top. With 1, I'm just gonna select that there, and I'm just gonna bring it up to about there. And then this part here, let's just pull that in a little bit, and then let's bring that down. Just like that. I think that should work. Let's have a look at that. Yeah, that looks pretty solid to me. And then I'll add one loop cut just on the back, just on the bottom here, just to create like a really hard lip at the bottom there. And then with that, I'll just move this down until it's touching the cup. I mean the plate. Until the cup is touching the plate. Like so. Yay! Thrilling stuff. And also I'll do one little loop cut just on the inside part there as well. Just to sort of sharpen that inner edge, even though you can't notice it. So why am I doing it? Why do I do these little things? You know what, it just looks weird. I don't know, it just looks like it's not touching it. It's like it's almost touching it. I guess that's because, yeah, I didn't do it fully. Yeah. All right, let's just do that. Yeah, something like that. I don't know. I just didn't want to look like it was like hovering. Yeah. How precious do you need to be, Andrew? I ask. There we go. The cup. The cup is now done. I like it. It looks just a little bit more solid. Because here's the thing, like when you make something realistic, which we've done with the wall, we've done with that. When we added the condensation, it's like you can no longer excuse it as being stylized. You've got to commit to a certain style, which is another lesson which you learn over the years. But if you've got like mixed styles, like if you now tried to do stylized, it's just not going to fit because everything else looks photoreal. Something else, these sprinkles. So our sphere sprinkle here, these little spheres on top here, they just look too big. I thought they looked okay, and maybe according to like one of the references that I found, let's see, Donut Aesthetic, yeah, it was this one. Like, I think these look pretty big, but then the sprinkles are also giant next to these balls. And we can't do that big of sprinkles there because then they would be clearly intersecting because we don't have, yeah, we can't solve for that intersection thing. So anyway, point is, I'm just going to grab that sphere there. I'm just going to scale it down by holding down control to 0.7, 0.7. In the top left-hand corner, you can see the numbers, 0.7. By the way, if when you're scaling something and you're holding down control or whatever, it's not scaling it, like it's not doing the incremental thing, it's because your snap to value there isn't set to increment, it's set to something else. So set it to increment, and then that means whenever you're moving something and you're holding down control, it'll actually do it according to increments. Anyway, whenever your to value there isn't set to increment, it's set to something else. So set it to increment. And then that means whenever you're moving something and you're holding down control, it'll actually do it according to increments. Anyway, that looks a little bit better now. By the way, if you did want to change the look of your sprinkles, like you'll remember in the shading, right? We set up this color scheme here, kind of an arbitrary color scheme. If you want to change it, you know, now's a good time to do it, right? Because honestly, like, I didn't set this up, like I'm not like the master of color or whatever. Like I was just playing with this before like the render, and I realized, sorry, before I started recording, and I'm like, hey, like a bluish aqua color actually looks kind of cool. I do actually kind of like that, kind of like a tutti frutti kind of look. But I also like the look of white. So I'll leave it to you. You decide, you know, the colors. It's like a fun thing, and you can add a personal touch to it. So we don't have 1 million donuts on the internet that all look identical. Add your little touch to it. Make it black and gold. Make it Halloween color, or the color of your favorite sports team. I don't know why you would do that. Somebody will, but I don't know. I'm just trying to shake things up, trying to make it interesting for you. Okay. Another thing we could do, and this is like, you know, again, because we went for the realism thing, we got to commit to it. Why not have some sprinkles on the plate? Why not, right? Because, you know, you put a donut on a plate, those things are barely hanging on for dear life. Some are going to fall off. Now, if I was to like duplicate or like take one of these sprinkles and put it over there, I need to rotate it, and then that would change the rotation of the ones on the donut. So I don't want to do that. I want to take this sprinkles collection, I want to duplicate that, and then I'm going to uncheck that box for the original sprinkles, a rotation of the ones on the donut. So I don't want to do that. I want to take this sprinkles collection, I want to duplicate that, and then I'm going to uncheck that box for the original sprinkles so that they're still the ones being used for the particles. These are the new ones. So I'll call this sprinkles placed, and then I'm not going to use all of them. Yeah, I'm just going to take all these, and I'm going to move them over to my plate. And then let's go into look. I'm going to move them over to my plate. Yeah, I'm just going to take these, all these, and I'm going to move them over to my plate. And then let's go into look dev mode. I don't know if this will actually, if we'll actually be able to see the colors of the sprinkles. I just want to check because you know it's using the random color amount. There we go. Yeah, we got 3 pink ones, so that's not good. It's luck of the draw, right? You don't know. I guess you could like duplicate one of them and see which other color you get. Let's try that. No, blue again. We got a yellow one. All right, let's do that. You could like, so that's not good. It's luck of the draw, right? You don't know. I guess you could like duplicate one of them and see which other color you get. Let's try that. No, blue again. We got a yellow one. All right, let's do that. So I'll go, yeah, pink. I won't go white. Yeah, blue, pink, yellow. Yeah, and then I'm just going to place them, like hand place them on the plate, which is, you know, always not the most fun thing to do. Actually, what you could do is you could go snap to face, and then when you move it, if you hold down control, it will automatically snap it to the nearest face. It will still be intersecting though, so it only gets you most of the way there. But anyway, and then I'll rotate this guy, and then I'll hold down control. It will automatically snap, you know, always not the most fun thing to do. Actually, what you could do is you could go snap to face, and then when you move it, if you hold down control, it will automatically snap it to the nearest face. It will still be intersecting though, so it only gets you most of the way there. But anyway, and then I'll rotate this guy, and then I'll hold down G, and then hold down control, snap it there, rotate, and then, so you might be asking, why do it by hand? Why not set up a particle system? Well, it's because I've only got 3 of them, right? And be my guest, if you want to set up a particle system just for these 3, go for it. But then it's going to be fiddly because you want it to rest on the plate, not half intersecting like they are on the icing. And it's just going to be some things you learn, and you only learn it through like trial and error and just trying things, are just more trouble than they're worth. And sometimes it's just easier to do it the hard way, so to speak. Point being, like, by hand. And that's how that looks, right? Little tiny little thing, and it's not much. But it'll make people go like, hey, wow, he could be bothered putting sprinkles on the plate. That's something. Right, now, I'm just going to take those sprinkles because I don't want them to move now. If I moved the plate, they would stay where they are. So I want to make sure 3 of my sprinkles are parented to the plate. Select the plate, would stay where they are. So I want to make sure 3 of my sprinkles are parented to the plate. Select the plate last, Control P. Keep transform. Cool. Speaking of the plate, I think the thickness is a little too intense. It's a little too, like, it just looks a little chunky. I want it to look like one of those Corel plates. I think that's an international brand, right? Corel. It's like those really thin plates that are like super light. And like once you buy a Corel plate, you're like, oh, that's the best plate. I don't want to use any of those heavy plates again. So I just want it to look like that. I don't know, it's like 13 mil right now. There we go. Cool. And then because of that, it's no longer touching the base anymore, so I'll move that down, and that is good. All right. Now, very quickly, the lighting. We've got, the lighting looks fine. It looks really good, but something you might want to do is change your environment lighting. So we're using world lighting. We're using the default world lighting, which is a slightly gray color. So what that means is that in the background here, this gray color you can see is because of this value here. If I was to change this, you can see that it now becomes white. Now that isn't just changing the background color, it's changing some of the light that's hitting the scene. So all that world now is actually acting as a source light, and it's actually casting some light into the scene there. And the strength of it is really controlled by the, well, now that I've been able to use nodes, now it's got a strength value there. But the strength of it is really controlled by like how bright that value there is, as well as this strength value underneath it. So if I wanted to make this look like an overcast day, hey, it's an overcast day, and that is horrible. Looks really, really bad and boring. So the default value being a dark gray is actually kind of perfect in a way. Because if this was set to black, you would see that you're now purely just being lit by the one single light point. And that's okay, but it does kind of look like it exists in outer space or something. Like there's really almost no situation in the real world where you have zero uncontrolled light. Like light, even in a studio environment, is going to have light bouncing off a wall and coming into it. So this is a cafe. There's another cafe on the right-hand side there. And there's going to be chairs, there's going to be other walls, there's going to be light posts and, I don't know, other things in the shop. And that's going to contribute some light to this. If you really cared, you could actually like model that or use an HDR and cast that. In our case, I think just having a little bit of a gray grayness to it, and then if you wanted to like even give it a slight little pink color, that will contribute to that as well, because that's something else you can do. You can, I didn't even show you that, but yeah, you can like tint everything with a world color there, which is kind of cool. But anyway, if we just made it a slightly pink color, like imagining that there's like another pink wall over there, if we just made it a slightly pink color, like imagining that there's like another pink wall over there, and then just turn that value down to a 0.2 or something like that. Anyway, I just wanted to mention it. We've barely changed anything on that, but I wanted to mention it because it's something that you can do if you wanted to improve it very, very, very slightly. All right, now one thing that will have a big impact is called depth of field. So looking from the point of view of our camera, if we let the samples count out, you can see that everything from the sprinkles up close right to the brick wall in the background is crystal clear in focus. And that is actually impossible, even with your eye, even with any camera in the world. There's no way to have two things that far apart completely in focus. There is always something that is the focal point, and then other things start to fall out of focus. So we can do that in Blender by selecting our camera, then going to the camera tab, and then down here you've got something called depth of field. So check that box and it will immediately go. We can do that in Blender by selecting our camera, then going to the camera tab, and then down here you've got something called depth of field. So check that box and it will immediately go. You want everything immediately 100% out of focus, which is crazy. Just moving out of that so you're not looking through the camera view. Select something as a focus object. So let's just click that little eyedropper and then select icing. And then when we look through the camera, this is what we have. So you can see that now the icing is the one that is in focus, and everything else is falling out of focus. So you and then select icing. And then when we look through the camera, this is what we have. So you can see that now the icing is the one that is in focus and everything else is falling out of focus. This f-stop value here is what's going to define how out of focus it becomes. So it's set to 6, and the higher you set this to, those of you who have used a DSLR will know that, oh, what happened there? I lost whatever was in focus. Yeah, the higher you set that to, the more things become in focus, or like the deeper the depth of field. Right, not the shallower, the deeper the, anyway, the more of that wall you can actually see the definition of, right? So anyway, an f-stop of 20 sounds like for a DSLR, that would be like everything basically in focus almost. It's like as far as it goes, like you can go slightly higher. But for some reason, Blender, you can go like all the way up to, I don't know, whatever value. Because this isn't a real camera, it's a digital camera, and I don't know what this is in relation to everything else. But anyway, I'm gonna go f-stop 20 for this. Now here's the other thing though, like it's not, I want actually what's right here where the sprinkles are, I want that to be in focus, and currently it's chosen the icing, which is like the middle of the icing, so it's kind of like the whole of the donut is what's in focus. I don't want that. So what I tend to do is I create a new object. So with the icing selected, if I hit Shift S, hold that down and go cursor to selected, my 3D cursor is now that origin point, and then I'm going to add a new empty right there. And this, that origin point, and then I'm going to add a new empty right there. And this, I can then, if I hit F2, which is the hotkey for just changing the name of something, I'm going to type in DOF, which just stands for depth of field. You can call it whatever you want, doesn't matter. And then with my camera selected, I can go focus object, and then I can select that object there. Now this yellow line there, if you see that, that is your limit, which shows you the thing that is actually in focus. Speaking of which, the size of the camera is ginormous, so I'm dialing that back so that it's actually a reasonable size. It doesn't look like lines just randomly going everywhere. Also, the depth of field, I'm going to make this a sphere and change the size of that. And now I'm reasonable size. Doesn't look like lines just randomly going everywhere. Also, the depth of field, I'm going to make this a sphere and change the size of that. And now I know that whatever really is inside this sphere is going to be the thing that's in focus. So now wherever I move this to, that's what's going to be the focal point. So I'm going to move that right there, right where the icing is. Sorry, right where the sprinkles, the closest sprinkles to the camera, basically. Cool. All right, let's have a look at that. Yay. So, looks nice. Now, a couple of other things we're going to change. One is this icing. I've noticed that. Cool. All right, let's have a look at that. Yay. So, looks nice. Now, a couple of other things we're going to change. One is this icing. I've noticed that the subsurface scattering settings that I used made it look like the icing is actually much deeper than it is. It looks like it's really like a thick glob of icing, and you've got light that's like diffusing right through the middle of it, like it's like a candle or something. Whereas really, it's really thin, so it shouldn't have that much subsurf. So I'm going to dial down the radius amounts here. So just holding, just clicking and then dragging down to select all three of those radiuses there. And I'm going to hit 0.1. And then the subsurface amount, I'm going to leave that at 0.2. And let's see how that looks. And then the subsurface amount, I'm going to leave that at 0.2, and let's see how that looks. All right, pretty good. So the other final change that I'm going to make is to the donut material. Now, I know we spent a couple of videos painting the thing, putting in these settings here. These are the ones that we ended up with. But I noticed, after taking a break and, I'm in Tokyo and I'm like scrolling through Twitter and I'm like seeing the results that people have been sharing with me, and I'm like, that looks not like a donut, it looks more like a scone, as we call in Australia, or in America, a biscuit, right? Like it looks like a little too uncooked to look like a donut. So I was basing it off of the reference photos that I found, which are kind of like almost like a bread kind of look, where it has like this really white patch through the middle. But for most references, for most donuts, it looks a little bit more cooked. It looks very saturated, very dark. So the values really are a lot darker than what we have. That was just kind of like my overall takeaway from it. So One big thing I'm going to change is just adding an RGB curves what we have. That was just kind of hook. I'm like, just for that looks. All right, pretty good. So the other final change that I'm going to make is to the donut material. Now, I know we spent a couple of videos painting the thing, putting in these, and I'm like, a bit saturated, very dark. So the values really are a lot darker than what we have. That was just kind of like my overall takeaway from it. So one big thing I'm going to change is just adding an RGB curves node, color RGB curves, and dropping that right in here. And then I'm going to take this middle point, and this is just going to crush the sort of the midtones, and it's just going to bring it down like that. Now, looks closer to the value that I'm looking for, but it also looks too red. So before that, I'm going to add in another node, and that's a Q saturation node. By the way, this is in another node, and that's a Q saturation node. Node. By the way, this is the painted material, just in case you've forgotten. This is a painted texture, so we're sort of like tweaking the color that we've got on it. Hue, if I change this, 0.5 is the default hue, but if I set this to a like slightly higher than 0.5, like a 0.520, it's going to make it more yellowy. If I go the other way, 0.548, it's going to make it more red. So I want to go 0.53, let's say 0.53, and that just makes it look a little bit closer to the hue that we were wanting. I mean, yours might be different, by the way. Like the exact color picker that I chose when I was choosing my paintbrush just looks a little bit too red when you crush the crush the values a little bit. So that's why I'm doing that. Now the other thing I want to do is over here. The noise that we have here, I think that noise is a little bit too small. So I'm going to increase that to 1000. The noise that we have here, I think that noise is a little bit too small. So I'm going to increase that to 1000. And then also, I wanted to make it look like a little bit more glazed, kind of like, I don't know, just looking at reference photos of like up close, like, I've seen way too many donuts. If you look at it, it's kind of like, it's basically, if we turn up this distortion amount here to like a 0.1, that looks kind of a little closer to the kind of randomized, like like thinning, like bits that are kind of like sticking up like that in a way. So I'm just setting that to a 1. And then the other thing, these big bits, this was something that some people actually said, they're like, mine looks like it has a disease now. And also mine, like Andrew's, you made your donut look like it has a disease. And I agree, it does look a little bit too pimply. So let's change this to be a little bit bigger in size. So 100 instead of 200. And then the detail, if we turn that up, that's gonna look more like like detailed noise instead of like big rounded shapes. So turning that up to that, it's going through this, which is giving it that look. Then it's going through this, which is giving it this, like speckledy look. Then I just want to increase that. I'm just going to make like this speckledy look, like really apply to it. And then that's going to go through our displacement, which is giving it this, like speckledy look. Then I just want to increase that. I'm just going to make like this speckledy look, like really apply to it. And then that's going to go through our displacement, which I want to increase more. So from 0.002 to 0.003. So just like a 50% increase. And that'll like really like push these outer bits and really make it look like, like bits that are sticking out, like kind of like a crispy looking donut. And in fact, if we add this to a roughness, if we turn down the roughness amount to like a 0.2 or 3, it looks like a shiny glaze, like freshly out of the oven, that kind of donut. Which I kind of like. I think that looks. I think it looks a lot better. And that's probably what we will go with. I'll display this and any other further changes on the screen right now. So if you want to change your values, you can. But change it. If things look a little odd to you, if things look too red, like perhaps mine does right now, then play around with things. Maybe I'll set this to a multiply amount instead of an overlay, and that'll have like a different kind of look to it, and maybe make it a little bit darker or something like that. Actually, that looks a lot better. So you can see like little tiny little changes will all have an impact. But I don't want to spend too long in this because then it's just like you end up with like an hour-long tutorial just like tweaking individual things and back and forth. It's the most boring thing ever. And this is already over 20 minutes. So thank you for watching this part. This is the visual final look for the visuals of our donut. In the next part, we're actually going to be